Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm Sana MAQBOOL and you're watching Pakistan TV. Here are the top stories of the hour that we'll be discussing today. Our first story is going to center around the Gaza flotilla that has reached about 90 nautical miles off the coast of Gaza, and of course very, very important in terms of the humanitarian aid needed for the people suffering there, including of course 50 ships from 44 countries. Extremely important also is the fact that they safely reach the coast and the people of Gaza. Whether that will be the case remains to be seen. We're also going to be taking a closer look at, with reference to of course the developing story in Gaza, the Trump peace plan, the 20-point agenda that has been put forward. There is a lot of course, discussion around whether or not it can be truly implemented, with a lot of the countries, including Pakistan, putting out statements that that's perhaps not exactly what was discussed or proposed by the Muslim countries, including Pakistan. And so that will be an important part of the discussion as well. We're going to then take a look at what has happened in Canada, with the BISHNOI gang being declared as a terrorist organization, which allows for, of course, more legal action to be taken against the gang and to move forward with more accountability. And lastly, we're also going to take a look at what has happened with reference to the kind of alleged disruptions and attacks by Russia, also targeting the airports in Denmark, which have resulted in a lot of discussion around how exactly will the EU countries be protecting themselves from these threats, with the Danish Prime Minister also speaking about how Russia is the only country that is posing a willing threat to the EU countries, and so we need to answer back strongly. These will be the 4 stories that we'll be covering today in the discussion, in the debate. Stay tuned. 90 nautical miles left off the coast of Gaza. And this is important not just in terms of this aid reaching to the people of Gaza, but also in terms of how exactly is international law protecting this fleet of 50 ships and protecting its main purpose of reaching to the people of Gaza, and of course from Israeli designs that have targeted and intercepted such flotillas in the past as well, and have also engaged in some sort of cyber attacks with this one too. So whether or not they're going to be peacefully reaching the coast of Gaza and will actually help the people there is something that is going to be the focus of our discussion. And what does the international law say about that? For that, we've been joined by SYED MUAZ SHAH, who's an international law expert and geopolitical analyst. Thank you very much, Mr. MUAZ, for joining us and being a part of the debate today. I want your take first in terms of helping us understand, where does international law protect this particular flotilla? Correct me if I'm wrong, there is an understanding of a certain area that is covered by the territory or a country. There's 12 nautical miles, of course, that's considered part of the territory, and then 200 nautical miles as part of the EEZ. And then there are the international waters, and that is something that we know Israel has violated in the past as well. But this particular issue with reference to the people of Gaza and the ongoing genocide is even more important in terms of humanitarian aid. So I want your understanding, and to help our viewers also and understand what really is the way forward in terms of the protection offered by international law to this flotilla.
Thank you so much, Sana, for first having and talking about this, and as a guest on your show. This issue, everybody knows, a very basic right. The international waters are available to everybody. And so the first law, the international law that allows this flotilla to be there in international waters, like you mentioned before the 12-mile marker, is they have a right to be there. That's why other nations, including Italy, recently had a ship that was going with them. You have Turkish drones, and this is all over international waters. And so Israel has no right to regulate this space, and the flotilla has a right to be there. Now, when it comes to the humanitarian aid delivery, there is some international law that also covers this. For example, you have the San Remo Manual on International Law Applicable to Armed Conflicts at Sea, which prohibits blockade that causes starvation or disproportionate suffering and forbids the targeting of neutral humanitarian missions. So it forbids that this neutral humanitarian mission, which is inter-country, there's a lot of participants from all over the world that have joined this flotilla. Even Pakistan has 6 representatives that are part of this. The UN Security Council Resolution 2720 and 2728 state that these are binding instruments that demand impeding humanitarian access and the removal of all barriers to aid delivery. What? The removal of all barriers to aid delivery. The humanitarian crisis in Gaza has been universally proven through multiple international NGOs, private investigators. The United Nations has openly accepted this need for humanitarian aid to reach there. So to remove all barriers for this aid to deliver is part of these UN Security Council resolutions that have been passed. In addition to that, the
Right.
Convention on the Prevention, go ahead.
Yes,
In
continue,
addition to
please.
that, if in addition to that, the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide includes the prevention of acts deliberately endangering civilians. So when we know that starvation is going on in Gaza, we
Yeah.
know that starvation is causing the death of children. We know that genocide is happening. So anything to prevent those acts that are deliberately endangering civilians, that means preventing the aid from reaching the civilians, would be considered a violation within this convention, according to some international legal experts. In addition to this, the Fourth Geneva Convention imposes an obligation to permit the free passage of humanitarian aid and prohibits interference with relief operations or the targeting of civilian infrastructure. We know Israel has been flaunting this. Israel's initial, if you remember, within 5 days of October 7th, they bombed the hospital, which was
Yeah.
one of the first violations of the war. This is part of that Fourth Geneva Convention that when you block the free passage of humanitarian aid, you're in violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention. And last but not least, the Rome Statute of International Criminal Court criminalizes the starvation of civilians as a method of warfare and willful obstruction of humanitarian aid. So we're looking at multiple
Yeah.
international documents, conventions, practices that Israel could be potentially violating by not allowing the flotilla to land in Gaza.
Right, but Mr. Moss, when we take a look at how, of course, there is so much that ensures that this flotilla reaches the people of Gaza, and there seems to be so many aspects of international law and conventions that will be in violation if it does not. But we also know that it has happened in the past, and that too without consequence. For sure, the genocide in itself is something that is happening despite the fact that there is international law that already exists. So when we talk about all of these conventions and these laws, how exactly will a violation be then met as part of this law?
So violations, of course, are treated in different ways in which states react. As you
Hmm.
know, South Africa reacted very early when they filed a case in the ICJ against
Yeah.
Israel on behalf of Palestine. That created a lot of issues that have actually supported the Palestinian cause, and for the people of Gaza, highlighting this, the legal aspects to it, which actually has now come to fruition. I understand the frustration of the common people who don't understand these workings, and often, sadly, international law is late to the party, as one of my professors
Agreed.
would say.
Yeah.
But the idea is that there is international law. This, what's happening in Gaza right now, what Israel is doing is setting the stone of what is the future to come, the new rules and regulations. What's happened with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation and how they distributed aid. Believe me, there will be further structures in place and conventions and rules that will restrict for the future. As we know, the recognition of the Palestinian state just happened nearly a week or two ago. And this happened as a result of this continuous pressure that is building on Israel. This 20 piece plan or 21 point peace plan that we're going to discuss later on your show, this has happened as a result of the alienation of not
Yeah.
only Israel but also the United States now, because of the continued progress in this. So I understand the immediate relief. What people are wondering, what sort of that, but sanctions are definitely on the table. Sanctions, the embargo of military aid to Israel is definitely at threat. So Israel is going to be very careful here. It's realized the recent actions that they did in Doha has caused massive ramifications that we've seen in the General Assembly. You've seen almost every nation stand up and leave. So clearly, it's put Trump in a very difficult situation. He had to meet with all those Muslim country leaders to come up with some sort of alternative. Now, they may be empty words, they may be something, time will tell. But unfortunately, America's reputation in the past year, ever since the Trump administration, has been questionable. Because what sort of guarantees can they give? And if they fail on this one, I think there'll be a huge deficit that they may not be able to come back from.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Masha, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. These views are, of course, very, very important, particularly when we talk about the guarantees that international law puts in place. And like Mr. Maz was sharing, it's important to understand that while, of course, it may seem nothing is happening or there is no accountability, there is protection and guarantees that these laws offer, which can then be invoked in case of a violation. What's important, of course, is that we are able to reach aid where it is needed. The humanitarian fleet of ships that are going to Gaza need to reach the people to end their suffering. This is something that, of course, is not just part of the way that international waters are being treated, but also part of how the UN works and how different countries are allowed to bring in humanitarian aid wherever there is suffering. While that is something that has been actively stopped in the past by Israel as well, there is, of course, a lot of effort that is underway to ensure that it doesn't happen this time around. It will be interesting also to see whether or not Israel acts a little bit differently, considering that the Trump administration has just announced the 20-point peace plan, which is, of course, something that is being championed by Mr. Trump as something that the U.S. is trying to achieve in Palestine, and, of course, putting an end not just to the suffering of the people of Palestine, but the larger situation of conflict in the region. But that, of course, is something that we will be then later on figuring out whether or not Israel will actually move forward with such a plan. And so in doing so, whether or not it will actually allow this flotilla to reach the people of Gaza, because that is what is needed at this time. There is, of course, a lot of concern that is being raised by multiple countries, including Pakistan, that have put forward a joint statement. And this is important also in terms of what will be the implementation of the plan and whether or not countries around the world will agree to it. We will be talking more about this and also how exactly we're going to ensure that humanitarian aid reaches the people of Gaza. For that, we've been joined by HASAN ABDULLAH, who's the diplomatic correspondent at TRT World. Thank you very much, HASAN, for joining us. And I'd like your take on what you think is the way forward in terms of the flotilla. We just discussed how there is international law's protection that guarantees that this aid actually reaches the people of Gaza. But given the way that we've seen Israel act in the past, do you think that this time around it will be any different and there are hopes of this flotilla reaching Gaza?
Well, I think history is actually a great teacher. If you look at the last 7 decades or so, it's very clear that there has been constant violation of international law. There's been a constant neglecting of the various UN resolutions. Israel has been neglecting them. The US has been vetoing any move, even for a ceasefire, despite more than 60,000 people being killed. So I think we really have to be very realistic and we have to look at the pattern and not really exaggerate, especially this 20-point plan. If you look at this plan itself, it basically strengthens and entrenches the status quo, which benefits Israel. So, for example, while they're talking about releasing the Israeli captives, there is no mention of what's going to be happening to the naval sort of area, the airspace, which is under the control of Israel. There is no mention of the occupied territories, not just in Gaza, but also the West Bank and other parts of the Holy Land, you know, the post-1967 illegal occupation, the expansion of settlements and so forth and so on. So I'm not really very optimistic about this. If you look at the statements from some of the Israeli cabinet members, they've been very clear. They've said that they're not going to allow the Israeli naval blockade to be broken by this flotilla. I've been looking at the live feed that's coming from some of those vessels. It seems that they're moving closer to Gaza. And it also seems that they've actually crossed a point where last time the vessel was targeted. So if you look at the statements that are coming from some of the participants, they're saying that they're really expecting to be targeted by Israel anytime.
But if you think about the 20-point peace plan that Mr. Trump has just shared, do you think that at least in terms of face saving for now, at least in terms of showing to the world that this is something that both Israel and the US are truly trying to achieve in terms of humanitarian aid reaching Gaza, do you think that this time around, just because of that, Israel won't target these ships?
Well, this would be face saving. I mean, Israel doesn't need face saving. Israel has been blatantly violating international law. Israel has even taken unilateral steps that apparently annoyed even the Trump administration on some instances. But I think if you look at the domestic US politics, if you look at the involvement of APAC and how the lobby funds American politicians, that's another story altogether. If you want, we can talk about it sometime. But Israel doesn't really need any face saving. The countries that have been praising and accepting this are the countries that are disregarding the ground realities, not just today, but what's been happening over decades. They have been completely disregarding the fact that all these 20 points, are entrenching the status quo, and that status quo benefits Israel. So I don't really see anything much to celebrate. If I've heard some people, they're saying that what other options were there? Well, if you look at just 3 of the countries, and if you want, I can name them, they have substantial leverage with the United States to basically have their way. And in the past, there have been very serious instances where those countries have done that. But,
Hassan, please
there
name
are
those
other
countries.
issues of divergence of interest and so on.
Go ahead, please name those countries.
Well, you've got Saudi Arabia, you've got Qatar, you've got Turkey. These countries themselves, they have substantial leverage in economic terms, in military terms. And there is a history. We have some very significant cases, for example, even the Jamal Khashoggi case, and how initially it was played out, and then how the matter basically died down. So I think we really have to look at these hard facts. In the past, there have been instances where some leaders felt annoyed by the behavior of some countries in the West, and they utilized that leverage to their advantage. And you had Joe Biden rushing to the Middle East, trying to patch up. You've had similar instances in other parts of the Middle East as well. So that leverage is there. That leverage is not being used. And again, I've got the 20 points in front of me. If you go through those points, it's very clear who the beneficiary is. There's no mention of all the illegally occupied territories. There's no mention of freeing of access, for the Palestinians. There's no mention of, the territory that's going to be constituting Palestine. Are they talking about the 1967, pre-1967 borders? There's no mention of any of that.
Right. Hasan, there's also a slight confusion with regards to a lot of the countries who have agreed in principle to this plan. And I'm glad you talked about how many of the countries who are agreeing with this are part of the problem. But many countries, including Pakistan, have clarified that they've agreed to this plan in principle. And it's not exactly the kind of plan that was presented by the Muslim countries and what has been put forward or agreed to. Where do you think is the difference here, and where is the problem in terms of the difference of understanding as to what Trump is proposing and what other countries are agreeing to?
Yeah, I mean, we had the statement from the Pakistani foreign minister as well. He's talked about precisely what you're saying there. But, that raises a number of other questions. How is it that many of the Muslim countries went out of their way to praise Trump and basically portray this as some sort of achievement, when apparently the points they had put forward were not even addressed? They didn't even make it to the proposal. All these points in the proposal, they go against the stated policy of Pakistan, of Turkey, of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and so forth. So it really does raise many questions.
Right. Thank you very much, Hasan, for joining us and being a part of the discussion and your views with us. This is going to be an important aspect of how we're going to take a look at the situation in Gaza and what really will be made of the peace deal that Mr. Trump has pointed towards. While in principle, the effort towards a ceasefire, towards peace is important and is welcome, it has to also undertake the core principles that, of course, are being supported by countries like Pakistan. And that is, of course, going back to what the status quo was prior to 1967, and we hope that is the case, of course, and we'll update you with regards to what the flotilla has achieved, and we hope that there is no attack, because humanitarian aid needs to get across the people of Gaza, irrespective of anything else. Now we're going to take a look at what has happened with reference to how Canada has responded to the BISHNOI gang, which is very, very important also in terms of labeling it and declaring it as a terrorist organization, which is not just something that is there just for the sake of it, but of course allows for the Canadian government to take a lot of legal action against this gang that has been causing quite a ruckus in the country, and of course has also pointed out how the Indian diaspora in particular, certain segments of the community are being targeted, and there hasn't been a lot of cooperation from the Indian government. And so we're going to be focusing more on where really this will stand, not just in terms of what Canada can achieve, but also in terms of the bilateral relations and responsibility by the Indian state. For this, we've also been joined by the General Counsel at Sikhs for Justice, by GURPATWANT PANNUN. Thank you very much, Singh Sab, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. I'd like your take first in terms of how do you see this decision by the Canadian government calling the BISHNOI gang a terrorist organization, a much needed effort, but in terms of actual implementation on ground, do you think that the Canadian government through this declaration will be able to achieve what it hadn't done previously?
First of all, Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh to all PTV viewers and to the viewers all over the world. You know, I would be very blunt because that is the reason that BISHNOI gang has been designated as a terror entity, because everyone, the Canadian government, the Canadians, and the Sikh organizations see it just from the face level, at the surface level. But the designation of this gang as a terror entity is nothing more than a political deflection by a corny government, by Canada's corny government, to reset ties with the India's Modi government. You have to look into the history, you have to look into the facts.
Yeah.
How is this gang operating in Canada? Nobody has ever heard about this gang before the assassination of Shaheed Nijjar. As soon as Shaheed Hardeep Singh Nijjar was assassinated, that very day, that is 19th June, 24 hours later, we have released the posters, we have released a statement that the Indian diplomats led by Sanjay Verma, India's raw officials, including in Vancouver and Ottawa, they are responsible for the assassination. And all this fell into place when the Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau stood in Parliament on September 18th and stated that the Indian agents are being investigated for their hand and for their role in the assassination of Shaheed Nijjar. Now you move forward. What did RAW and NSA Doval did? The first action the Trudeau government did was to expel RAW chief, that is Pawan Kumar Rai, in 2023, June and July. So if RAW chief is expelled from Canada, and with RAW and NSA over 1 year building a narrative that these extortions, these assassinations, and anything that is having any crime that is happening in Canada, they were pointing it to this BISHNOI gang. And who was behind this, peddling this narrative? Indian government, Indian media, and the Indian organizations in Canada. Yeah. So slowly they changed the narrative and took the responsibility and made sure that responsibility of assassinations goes to the foot soldiers. And the foot soldiers are just the hands which were shooting. They are not the one who are the master planners. They are not the one who are orchestrating assassinations of pro-Khalistan Sikhs. So the Canadian government, when they presented this report before the Canadian Parliament in October 2024, they categorically stated Indian Minister Amit Shah is running extortions, assassination, and other criminal network through this gang. So who was peddling this, and what happened today is just a political deflection. Actually, the masterminds and those who are orchestrating these assassinations and extortion plots is no other than the RAW.
Right. We understand that, but Singhji, we want your take also in terms of then how exactly will you hold them accountable, at least with this step forward with the Canadian government. There is, of course, a lot of steps that the Canadian government can take against the BISHNOI gang, but what can they do about the real root cause of the matter, which traces itself back to India?
Look, this gangs, we are not even worried about. We are not worried about the gangs because the real culprit, the real mastermind is NSA Chief Ajit Doval, the RAW chief, and the RAW as an organization. It can have any face. When you are shifting the responsibility, when you are whitewashing a crime and stating and giving a clean chit to the Indian government, to the Modi government. So my question, instead of me giving an answer, if every crime is being committed by a gang member, or why did Canada expel Indian High Commissioner Sanjay Verma? Why did RCMP and CSIS and NSA made a report of transnational repression which runs into hundreds and thousands of pages and categorically states how RAW is operating from the Indian consulates, how they are using foot soldiers, whether they belong to one gang or they belong to another gang.
Right.
All this
right,
is
but my question remains, Singhji, though, when we talk about all of these measures taken, I understand what they're implying and what really is the problem. But in terms of accountability and action to be taken, do you think that these measures are making a difference to RAW JP within India?
Zero. This is just, as I told you, this is a political deflection with malicious intent by a Carney government. And I can assure through your channel to the Canadians, others can be quiet and others can be happy, and they are happy to buy India's narrative. But we as an organization, as a pro-Khalistan 6, we will make sure that we expose Carney government's agenda of resetting the ties with Modi. We will make sure that we hold the RAW operatives and the RAW accountable for the assassinations in Canada. Just because Carney is a prime minister right now, that does not mean that he is not going to follow the Canadian laws. We will force them to follow the Canadian law. We will force them to declare RAW and designate that as a terror entity, because the worst you can do is to go and being quiet, and which we will not be.
Right, absolutely. And Singhji, when we talk about the action and accountability that people can take, or organizations such as the SFJ can take, how exactly are you making sure that this is something that is happening not just in Canada, but also elsewhere in the world, including India, with the public demanding action and accountability from the state?
You know, I just wanted to give me a little more overview of this, how the narrative India is building and how the Canadians are buying this narrative. And how the assassination plots, if you look into the indictment that happened in US in my murder for hire plot, the US prosecutors have filed evidence in which they have stated that the whole plot, which was murder for hire plot in America for me, assassination plots in Pakistan, assassination attempts in Nepal, and the assassination of Shahid Nijar is orchestrated and handiwork of India's RAW agency. Even in my case over here, the RAW and NSA tried to follow the same copybook what they did it in Canada, but the US prosecutors and Trump administration didn't buy that. I'll tell you what, in October 2024 and November 2024, when Vikas Yadav was indicted for orchestrating this murder for hire plot, within 30 days, what did India and the NSA Ajit Doval did? They filed a criminal case against Vikas Yadav, stating that along with this BISHNOI gang, he tried to do extortion from somebody in Delhi itself. How worse it can go? It's not even a Bollywood style. They are falling into their own trap, but US, the Trump administration didn't buy this. They even did not even look into it that Vikas Yadav is arrested. They all know that they are just doing this one to hide RAW, which has been uncovered by the US prosecutors and US FBI and DEA. But Canadian government, after Trudeau, they wanted to reset the ties. So they brought in a Indo-Canadian foreign minister who has ties to India, and they're trying to reset the ties as if every Canadian or every pro-Khalistan Sikhs is covering their eyes with a black cloth. We are not. If we are ready to face a bullet to continue Khalistan referendum campaign, if we are ready to die for the cause, don't they think that we will be raising our voice and following the Canadian law and we will expose them? They should know that.
Absolutely. Yes, please continue.
So now you tie this raw that they have tied them to assassination plots in Pakistan. So it becomes Pakistan government's responsibility to speak up on that one. That US prosecutors have indicted Raw directly having assassination plots in Pakistan, having assassination plots in Nepal and in Canada. But there is this narrative which is being peddled by Indian government, Raw and SA Ajit Rawal, that we are not there, we are not responsible. Actually, it's a gang members. Actually, they are the one who are doing assassinations. I mean, what that gang has anything to do with Khalistan Sikhs? What is they have to do with that?
Right,
they might be responsible for some
we have, as you've just mentioned previously as well, and Pakistan, as you know, has also put forward a lot of evidence in the form of dossiers in terms of state-sponsored terrorism that exists. So the linkages that you're drawing have also been narrated by countries like Pakistan. Of course, your efforts are there as well. But despite that, as we've discussed before, without real efforts from countries like the US or Canada and their governments actually taking note of how much the state is involved, how do you think that there will be true accountability? What aspects of the way that sovereignty works, the way that the governments in countries like Canada and the US are obliged to protect their citizens can actually move forward with the kind of leverage and pressure that they have on the Indian state, since this is something that has evidence of state-sponsored terrorism?
You know, like you have to differentiate between Canadian actions and the American actions. Not publicly, but if you look into even reports by some of the newspapers that the Americans have expelled each and every raw agent and from America, whether it is from San Francisco, DC, or New York. There is no raw presence in America. They are banned to be in the consulates. On the other side, Canada, who has expelled one raw chief, who has expelled diplomats, now they are shifting the blame to a gang. The way accountability is going to happen is that these Sikhs who are facing assassinations, death threats, and this intimidation, whether it's media, journalists, even journalists in Canada, they are facing threats when they speak about a cause, when they speak about political dissent against the Modi government, even they are facing threats and the intimidation. Accountability has to come from one powerful country, and USA is making sure that they will hold each and every raw agent, whether it's NSA Dole, whether it is Vikas Yadav. It is going to happen in the court of law. You will see that on November 3rd when the trial is going to start. And in Canada, we will make sure as a Canadian citizen, because I'm also a Canadian citizen, we will make sure as a Canadian citizen that we hold the Carney government accountable and we force them to take a legal action against the raw and the raw agents.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. GURPATWANT Singh, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. Your views on what efforts you have already taken and will be taking in the future for what is going on in Canada and, of course, in the region at large by India in terms of state-sponsored terrorism. This brings us to the last story, where we will take a look at what has happened with reference to the kind of drone disruptions at Danish airports, and then, of course, the way that the EU leaders have gathered in Copenhagen to talk about how this particular defense mechanism needs to be developed, many proposing a drone wall as well, whether or not we'll be able to protect it from the kind of threats that, according to the Danish Prime Minister, only exist truly from Russia. And so there needs to be a stronger answer back. But these incursions are something that need more focus, and whether or not the EU countries can actually unite on the matter, and what would that mean, particularly in terms of the way that Russia is also being viewed in the region, and how, of course, airspaces of EU EU countries are being targeted. This is again a problem of violation of international law, but with reference to what has happened in the past, of course, with Ukraine and Russia, there is a lot of discussion around how far this will be going and what sort of serious threats it proposes in terms of what the EU countries can possibly do. We know that, of course, Denmark is on high alert. It has also not allowed any drones to fly, particularly for this gathering of EU leaders as well. But as far as mechanisms on a larger scale are concerned, there remains to be seen what sort of efforts can be made in this regard and how exactly will the EU countries unite against this stance. There is, of course, also a lot of reasons in terms of the ways that such cybersecurity issues need to be protected, both regionally and internationally, and how exactly Russia will fall into that. For this and more, we have been joined for further discussion on this by Dr. Hamid Khan, who's a political analyst. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Hamid, and being a part of our show. I'd like your take on first when we talk about the way that Russia allegedly has targeted the Danish airports. It's important to understand the scale, of course, of these drone disruptions and what possibly they imply for the future as well. It seems that it has really shaken the EU countries. We know that the PM has also responded to how seriously they're taking this threat. But in terms of a response to it, and they say they want to answer back strongly, what will that look like?
Thank you very much, Sana. Yes, that is very alarming situation for EU and particularly for those countries who are very close to or easy target for Russia. It is very alarming. And on the other hand, EU has to be very calculated when it comes to their response because their response could escalate the situation. On the other hand, there is no admission from the Russian authorities about any such kind of drone, intervention or any such kind of attacks or, on their airports or wherever they are claiming. While a separate investigation is also undergoing from Copenhagen police and the other investigative departments, and they have not even confirmed yet. But we have seen so many other evidences where there has been, drones intervention from Russia in Poland and in other neighboring countries as well. I believe that now, since President Trump have changed his response or his stance on the way NATO was working in Ukraine-Russia war, so it is all burden lies on Europe itself, and that is where the Europe needs to find out a strategy for to counter all those kinds of attacks, all those kinds of possible escalations or aggression. But they have to be very calculated, and their reliance on Russian gas and Russian energy sources is always there. Their reliance on other matters with Russia is there. And on the other hand, we have seen that there is still a very large territory of Ukraine is gone under Russian occupation now. So this situation is getting very complex, and that is what they're going to discuss in the summit in next 2 days in Copenhagen. And in terms of their response, in terms of possible response, talking about further sanctions on Russia, talking about further more layers from Europe to expand the safeguarding the airspace of NATO countries and particularly European countries. And when they talk about the safeguarding the airspace, it could be through drones, it could be through fighter jets, it could be through some other high-tech resources. So there are few options which NATO has to implement and has to explore. But on the other hand, as long as there is no admission from the Russia, there is highly unlikely that there will be any, I would say, direct attack or direct escalation towards Russia.
Right. There are proposals also of a drone wall, and I understand you mentioned a number of proposals that can be taken as part of this conference. But in terms of having a unified stance, do you think that the EU countries will be able to achieve that?
Sana, yes. At the moment, still there is a lot of unity in terms of responding to all the aggression or all the steps taken by Russia. And there is a unity in Europe, particularly France, Germany, and then the Scandinavian countries such as Denmark, Sweden, and then Norway. But there is always one very critical point, and that is, as I said, the dependency of Europe on Russian, energy sources, and that dependency is very high on for Germany and France particularly, and that's why there is always a little bit leniency from Germany and France when it comes to action taken against Russia, whether it was Nordic gas pipeline and or other options, But I think it is more to do with financial pressure on Russia, and we have seen in last 3 years that the way Russia handled all kind of financial sanctions on their companies and on their institutions, I think now Europe feels that it may not be that effective as well. And now the only thing remains is that they have to support Ukraine, particularly in terms of retaliation towards Russian forces, because as much as Europe believes that as much as Russia is engaged with Ukraine, there will be highly unlikely chances of any further escalation from Russia to any other countries or any aggression. So this could be another policy from them. But on the other hand, Zelensky is very weak, getting weak every day in Ukraine.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Hamid, for joining us and sharing your views on
Right.
this important matter. There is, of course, a lot of concern as to what Russia does next, but we will also be keeping a close eye at this conference in Copenhagen as to what the EU countries decide. Here's the crux of the debate today. What we talked about is, of course, the flotilla, and we hope that it reaches Gaza very soon. This is something that is coming after Trump's announcement of the 20-point peace plan. So it seems that there may be an opportunity for Israel to use this and not strike this flotilla as it has done in the past. Even so, there are international laws that protect this flotilla and for humanitarian aid to reach Gaza, which is extremely important at the moment. There is some confusion with regards to how different countries, including Pakistan, are responding to the peace plan, agreeing in principle, but saying that that's not exactly what they agreed upon. What has happened in Canada, of course, is important in terms of the BISHNOI gang being declared a terrorist organization. But again, the accountability at home in India is something that remains to resolve the issue at its core. And lastly, when we take a look at regional expansion, Russia, of course, has done so in terms of the airspace and the drone disruptions that are being traced back to the country. Of course, it has denied any wrongdoing, but there is a lot of concern among the EU states as to what lies next. We'll be here to talk about it, but that's all that we have from the debate today. We'll see you tomorrow.